Peace Asadum was against a subsidy.
As I said, I will tell you the reality of what we do right now. What we do right now is that we subsidize the cost so that people get off their cars and motorbikes and travel by bus, and that is happening.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Moeed Pirzada. Global Village Space magazine is bringing a special edition to document the environmental challenges Pakistan faces at this juncture. Joining me right now is the Finance Minister of the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Mr. Taimur Jhagra. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, sir, and a pleasure to be here.
And thanks for finding time for me. I know that you're very busy. What was the extent of damage to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's economy as a result of these massive floods?
There was significant damage. There's no doubt that these are one of the worst, in many aspects, the worst floods that the province has ever experienced. They're the worst floods that Pakistan ever experienced. The damages, if you segment them into two,
are they more severe than 2010 floods?
I'll just come to that. If you segment the damages into two, if you actually look at the overall economic losses, we believe that they will run north of $1 billion. I think if you actually look at the amount of money that the government will actually have to spend, and that money, of course, is unbudgeted and will need to be financed, is about 125 billion rupees, according to current estimates. Those estimates keep changing. That's about $500 million. I don't want to exaggerate that figure because doing so tends to produce its own side effects. For example, at the federal level, there are different numbers being bandied about and then being retracted, perhaps because of the lack of accuracy. But we stand by our numbers. Were these floods worse than 2010? They should have been. They could have been. But one difference that made them not as bad in some respects was the fact that the government was able to respond more proactively in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
You think so?
And some of the investments that have been made over the last 10 years, which we believe is the first time that any government in Pakistan has actually invested proactively in the sort of interventions that can both help adapt and mitigate to such challenges, paid off in a big way.
Mr. Jhagra, you are the head of the Ministry of Finance in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Has your ministry made any formal assessment into the financial calculations?
Yes, the figures that I quote to you are based on our formal assessments. The formal assessments are actually not carried out by the Finance Ministry, but by the Provincial Disaster Management Authority.
Right.
And I can give you these figures with a lot of confidence because of the 4 provinces and the federal government, because we end up getting entities such as the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank to validate our estimations. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has been the province where the accuracy of our estimations have been validated to 95%.
You're also a cabinet member. So has your cabinet, as the government, made an assessment as to why you faced such massive environmental disaster?
It's very clear that this is going to be a recurring occurrence, not just in Pakistan, but across the world. We know that there are island states that are ultimately going to be submerged within this century because of global warming.
Like what states?
Pacific Islands, Vanuatu is one that comes to mind that I read about.
Because of the rising sea
levels. Because of the rising sea levels. There are risks to different islands in the Maldives. These are typically the states that have shouted most vociferously about climate change. We believe that countries such as Pakistan should have done so because large swathes of land may be safer. But just the quantum of people living in Pakistan, 230 million, means that the impact of a climate disaster in a country like Pakistan is greater than perhaps anywhere else in the world.
So what kind of impact it can bring on Pakistan in the coming years?
You know, I studied this once before I joined politics, and we found that a large flood event of certain magnitude used to hit the country or parts of the country somewhere between once every 10 and once every 20 years. Over the last 20 years, the erraticness of the rainfall, but the magnitude of large rainfall days increased significantly. We have seen over the last 5 years specifically, almost year after year globally being one of record temperatures, of erratic seasonal patterns, and the impact of that on Pakistan is obviously great. This is a relatively arid country that depends on the glacial melt in the Himalayan mountains and the associated ranges that feeds the Indus River system of Pakistan. And with more erratic rainfall, the plains get flooded, the weaknesses of our governance get more pronouncedly highlighted, millions of people get displaced, crops get affected, food security gets impacted, economic growth gets impacted, millions of people go below the poverty line. The impact, of course, is on all of Pakistan, but the impact of food security in a place like Pakistan is felt beyond Pakistan, more widely because of how big the market is. And it is important to end this by saying two things. One, that I certainly believe, and our government certainly believes, that the primary responsibility to fix these issues is ours. But two, that in many respects these issues are not of our own making, and that the world does owe a debt to countries like Pakistan that have not created this problem in certainly the form of carbon emissions, but pay the price for it.
You know, you said a short while ago that before joining the politics,
Yep.
you know, and that brings me to that thought that I think you have been one of the rare, perhaps the only McKinsey Company who has joined Pakistani politics.
Correct.
You're the only one.
Yes.
No one else ever from the McKinsey or McKinsey Company has ever been in Pakistani politics.
Not at a senior level. I was elected. I was, in fact, the first partner elected on the basis of public sector work in Pakistan.
So what brought you to politics?
I think just the conviction and passion to say that I think too much of the talent in this country tends to complain about what's wrong with Pakistan. And I feel that this is a country that has enough of a critical mass of people with the right capacity that need to put their hand up and attempt to change it. And that's been the gist of my journey over the last 4 years. I don't know, it's for others to judge where I've succeeded and where I've not succeeded, but I think the most important thing is to raise your hand and try, because you set an example for others. And I think if enough of us in Pakistan who are privileged enough to either come from the right background or the right professional training, come back and contribute, we will solve many of our problems much quicker than we do.
You joined McKinsey from London Business School.
Yes.
When I was in Colombia, one of my romance was to join McKinsey Company. Never ended up joining. But my impression of McKinsey and Company is this, that you're a solution finder. So the governments or the corporations hire
Yes.
McKinsey consultants to find solutions. And if you put that hat on, what are the solutions to the crisis what you're facing in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa at the moment, this in terms of environmental disaster?
We need to expand on the investments that we've been making and that have paid off.
What
in a bigger
investments
way.
you've been making?
So I'll give you 4 or 5 examples that actually made a huge difference to how well we managed these floods. Number one, and I got a lot of feedback, not just from colleagues in the government, but from people in the private sector, people in the development community, that what stood out about Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's response was the proactiveness with which it evacuated people.
The people.
That is due to the fact that over the last 4 years, we've expanded a notional rescue service into one that exists in each of the 35 districts of the province. It's a basic service in Western countries, but It, for example, still doesn't exist in Sindh. We have it in all 35 districts, and they actually rescued thousands of people from death. So that's one. Two, in terms of the sort of interventions that have actually helped stave off the impacts of climate change. The previous government of Imran Khan, this is not at a time when I was in politics, made a huge investment.
When you joined?
End of 2017.
So you were not part of the government that was formed in 2013?
I was not part of the government. I was actually working as a consultant in other parts.
You founded McKinsey in Pakistan?
I was one of the 3 partners who helped found the company in Pakistan and helped establish the Pakistan
office. Is it still working in Pakistan?
It is working, but I don't know.
Anything.
I can't give you much in terms of how well they're doing or not. I'm sure they're doing well because they're the only big consulting.
I think it's a conflict of interest.
I think it would be a conflict of interest if I were to closely
be monitoring them.
Yes.
It was just a digression. Yeah. So, thinking in terms of solution finding, many of the critics of PTI government, of which you are part, think that all the notions of the billion tree tsunami and small dams were mostly slogans or were basically plans on the paper. And the government of PTI between 2013 and 18 and between 18 and 22 hasn't really delivered on small dams and on the tree plantation.
One of our challenges in Pakistan is that many people who have a voice in opinion making tend to speak without facts, the relevant facts. And I was just on the phone with the Environment Secretary, who is someone I've known for the last 10 years. We've placed him there because of the quality of the job that he has done, not just in this department, but elsewhere. And against the target of 1 billion trees, there are actually about 1.1 billion trees on the ground right now.
1.1 billion trees.
This is of the original target. And as the second government came into place, Imran Khan had a vision of 10 billion more trees being planted, of which Khyber Pakhtunkhwa had to plant another billion, and progress against that also is on track. The impact is, of course, in terms of the environment, in terms of increasing forest cover, which was increased, and all of this is audited by about 6.3%.
So you're saying that more than 1 billion trees in the last 7-8 years have actually been planted in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa alone?
More than 1 billion trees have been planted.
Tree saplings, basically.
Indeed, people pick up small pieces of data that they don't understand. So, for example, the way that this works is that a certain proportion of the tree plantation in terms of the overall target are regenerated. You plant a certain amount of saplings, there's a natural growth from that saplings, you keep on auditing them. And I think 40% of the overall trees that are available on the ground have come.
I see some international organizations had also praised the KP government for that. But given the lack of belief within Pakistan and given the polarization of the Pakistani politics, can you give us where the bulk of these trees have gone into? Which parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa?
They're actually across. There are trees in the former tribal districts. Okay. There are trees in southern Pakhtunkhwa. There are trees in the Peshawar Valley. There are trees actually all over the province. All of these are geotagged. All of these are available to see.
Right.
And as you said, the program has been audited multiple times, included by the World Wildlife Fund. So I think this is the, and currently we are actually in the process of trying to see how we can use the net positive environmental impact of that in terms of gaining carbon credits, for the province, becoming a source of revenue, because I think it's an incredible achievement.
Are you going to file the carbon credit request?
We want to think about this in a big way. So what we actually have to do is to create an entity that can actually act as an accreditation entity that can then apply to these carbon markets, that can beyond this also that can also propose these projects and other projects to the Green Climate Fund, which is the primary source of green climate financing worldwide. So I think that we want to think about this in a big way. Now, similarly, in terms of the microhydel dams that you talk about, the first phase of this, and again, this was an indigenous idea. The billion tree was an idea by the political leadership. The micro dams were an idea by the political.
Where was the idea coming from? I mean, who gave the idea to Imran Khan?
Look, I wasn't present at the time, but the way that I've seen Imran Khan and his core team work, there's a lot of brainstorming.
The idea.
There's a lot of brainstorming. There's people that come from outside. Ideas also organically grow. Being personally associated with the Sehat card, which may not be the subject of this particular interview,
discussion,
I've seen how we can compound these ideas, and what really fills me with pride is
looking at this disaster which befell Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in the last several weeks. How has the initiative of the forestation and the small dams really helped Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or hasn't it not helped?
They help spillovers and help prevent flooding. This is for sure. They of course help protect against soil erosion. It's not just this. One of the biggest investments that was made, and I think we're talking about 15 to 20 billion rupees, is a large embankment around the Peshawar Valley, specifically in the Nowshera district.
Right.
It was also derided for a while because it was in the district of the former chief minister, and there's a lot of casual criticism about it not necessarily being needed. That particular project has actually saved the entire Peshawar Valley from flooding.
Because of the plantation, because of the
in this case, because of the embankments, the embankments being built, creating a protective wall that allows the river to hold more water in the case of flooding.
But I remember Imran Khan has been saying that this tree tsunami will prevent the climate change. He has been on record saying this many times. What he exactly meant by that? I mean, this.
When you do this at a global level, so I think we know that Pakistan is one of the least forested countries in the world.
4%, less than that.
Of the different administrative units in Pakistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is the one with the most forest cover.
How much you have?
Because of the billion tree project, forest cover has gone from 15% to 21%.
In the United States, is approximately 33% of the territory.
Well, you're not going to have a lot of forest cover in Balochistan, which is about half of our land mass.
43%.
Yeah. But I think the target of 1 billion trees, because if you look at some of the targets of countries like the UK or Canada that tend to celebrate planting 10 million trees, the ambition for a country like Pakistan was huge, and for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa to deliver on it has also been huge. How does it help on climate change?
Yes, this is the point I want to understand. In the context that the government took this initiative in 2013, we are in 2022, almost 9 years. How has it helped the climate in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or maybe anywhere in the Pakistan?
I think that you look at this at a larger scale. The more forest cover you have, the more you're actually fighting against the sort of increased carbon dioxide or carbon emissions in the environment that are ultimately going to take the world to a point where the increase in temperature.
So you're absorbing carbon.
You're absorbing
you're releasing
carbon.
Oxygen.
You're absorbing carbon. And for us, what that specifically means in the long term, because I think we have set the foundation for being able to forest more area. If we play our part in this in the world, we also help save the glacial melt of our glaciers. We know how much we rely on that for our water system, and given our population growth, perhaps our biggest problem is water scarcity and effective water management. So in a very direct way, increasing forest cover can help stabilize the environment, and there's almost going to be nothing more important than that for Pakistan in the coming decades.
So basically, you're saying that what Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is doing is not only contributing to Pakistan, but to the whole region and the world, because of course you can't bracket the countries through walls.
Indeed, and then we are taking a lead in this. You saw that the 10 billion tree tsunami followed the billion tree tsunami. If there were no billion tree tsunami, there would be no follow-up 10 billion trees either, right? So the point is that it set up the stage for the country to increase its ambition on big climate change initiatives. And I personally believe that as we recover from these floods, what is our challenge, and I will certainly make sure that we try our best to do it, is to not just on paper, but really to build back better, to build back greener, to do more of what actually saved Nowshera in the Peshawar Valley, to invest more in services like our rescue service that can actually help save lives at times of natural disaster or indeed local disasters such as large fires and so on. And we've also proven that, of course, outside this space with the Sehat card, which has helped revolutionize the health industry. But it is very clear as we start to make long-term investments that improve service delivery, we in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa can prove that they certainly pay back in the ways that they are intended to pay back. But I think, Moeed, that we also take our voters typically for granted and tend to think that they don't understand bigger issues, because I personally feel that it is these large investments that have led to PTI's popularity in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, because
you mean people have perceived the work you're doing in climate change?
I believe that people perceive the large game-changing initiatives that we make that are not run-of-the-mill, that are not business as usual, that actually signal intent and demonstrate that we can actually change the way that this country works.
But climate change is a big global subject from Europe to North America. So has the KP government found international partners?
We are certainly working with international partners. At this point, I think we're really at the cusp of creating the capacity to be able to raise more finance for climate change. And where we engage with large partners is really going to be on the basis of how quickly we can do that. But before that...
And what these partners can be? World Bank, Asian Development Bank?
Certainly the large multilateral banks, certainly bilateral donors such as UKAID, such as USAID, but also climate-specific initiatives. I think Khyber Pakhtunkhwa would also be happy to contribute more to the national conversation on climate change that happens at the Conference of the Parties every year.
But this sounds like in the future. I mean, what happened in the last 9 years? Has KP engaged European Union, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, USAID, DFID?
We have the, for example, the microhydel dams, which were an indigenous idea. I think the Asian Development Bank got so excited about them that they actually told us that you build them and we will fund them.
How many of them you have built or conceived even?
About 300 are built.
Right.
And other than a few, and we're talking single digit or teens that don't work fully, all of them work, are owned by the community, are managed by the community, and not only allow for places that are off-grid to get electricity and cheap electricity, but also have effects such as reducing the amount of illegal wood cutting in these areas because they've got fuel and energy and electricity. And in most places, and again in places like Chitral, there's evidence that the communities manage these microhydel stations themselves. They have a system through which they collect payment for electricity. They have differentiated rates between domestic consumers and commercial consumers.
So all of these microhydro projects produce electricity?
Most of them.
Most of them.
There's always going to be the occasional problem.
They're very short in height, 6 feet, 10 feet. Are they like this?
I'm sure they can be improved. It's a project that I've only looked at from a financial perspective, but we want to scale up to a second round of up to 1,000 more microhydel dams, for which the Asian Development Bank is also going to help us. And this is the example of one partner. By the way, not just this, Moeed. I think something like the unfortunately made controversial in some areas of the media project, such as the bus rapid transit project in Peshawar.
You mean made controversial?
Made controversial because...
But the media thinks that it has remained stuck for so long.
The media thinks it has remained stuck.
The plan kept on changing. There was charges of corruption. They say it's in the court.
It happens in most large projects. But the reality is that there are 300,000 customers across Peshawar that use the bus service every day. Those 300,000 customers leave their cars or bikes at a station. I was just going to the office day before yesterday and suddenly noticed that there was a swathe of about 500 motorbikes at what used to be a petrol station, which has now become a park and ride facility for the middle class that get on a bus,
see what they say
go to the office.
What would establish the London Business School yardstick is, are you taking the bus yourself? Like the British Home Secretary or something.
I do. I have taken the bus.
Have you tried it?
I have taken the bus on occasions. I have also thought of actually cycling to work on occasions. Sometimes there are time constraints, but if the bus went next to my office, right, because most people who take it are able to take it to places of work that are close. Unfortunately, close to the office, the stop, we want to extend a feeder route. It's in the cantonment area of Peshawar, and we have had trouble getting clearance from the cantonment authorities. But when we do get clearance, I will be the first person on that bus, because not only will it be more convenient, but I will also be able to reduce my carbon footprint.
You know, you must have heard that your critics, the PMLN people, basically say that first the PTI criticized the Islamabad-Pindi metro project as being wasteful, useless, and blah, 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 very expensive. And then they started making their own in Peshawar. And then they couldn't complete it in time, whereas the Shahbaz Sharif and Nawaz government were able to complete the project literally like 12 months or 14 months and has been working smoothly ever since. But the Peshawar project was stuck again and again, court cases, corruption charges.
I think it became in the spotlight of the media, but what I would say is, and as I said, I wasn't part of the government when it was conceived and started, but I can tell you that as it's finished, and it's actually finished in very, very good time. There's unfortunately, when it was started to be made, the Chief Minister had set a target to do it in 6 months, which was frankly unrealistic. But as it's been made, we've proven the difference. Our buses are greener because they're hybrid buses. They don't just run on diesel. They're part of an...
Oh, you mean they're part electricity?
Indeed. They are... it's a gold standard BRT, and what that means is that the corridor itself is integrated with off-corridor routes. So it actually covers the entire city. You don't have to get off the network, walk, take a taxi drive.
It's like London.
It's the beginnings of something like a London transport service.
Because I'm sure that you must have used the London tube system.
I have certainly used,
unlike the Peshawar one.
System. No, I've used the Peshawar. I've not only used the Peshawar route system, I've helped set the fees for it. I've based them on what I saw in the UK, and I'm proud that there are thousands of people from my village that are using it every day. Now, I'll tell you something else. We've gone from phase 1 to phase 2, where we're actually connecting it not just to different areas in Peshawar, but also outside Peshawar, to Charsadda, to Nowshera, so connecting the entire Peshawar Valley. And in the third phase, we've actually already commissioned a survey where we want to look at all of Peshawar district, so we can expand it from the main route and the 8 feeder routes that we have.
What's your ticket price?
You
said you set the fee, you're the financial czar. So what's the ticket fee?
It is 50 to 60 rupees for an end-to-end journey.
Whereas it's only rupees 20 in Islamabad and Pindi, I think 20 or 30.
We're 20. Talking of, I don't know about the fees in, or I don't know about
I think it's 20
over here. But
I have used
it
a few
tell you
times.
Is people
for just for sightseeing.
It starts from about 10 rupees.
In Peshawar?
In Peshawar.
And there's one fixed fee. In Rawalpindi, Islamabad, there's one fixed fee.
No, we have a smarter fee system so that...
But you financed by Asian Development Bank.
The capital investment was financed by Asian Development Bank. We have deliberately kept the fees low to allow people to take transport. But getting back to the topic... Are you subsidizing it then? We are absolutely subsidizing it because we want...
Which is another thing you were against subsidy.
I was not against subsidy. I think subsidy.
I think at least Asaduma was against a subsidy.
As I said, I will tell you the reality of what we do right now. What we do right now is that we subsidize the cost so that people get off their cars and motorbikes and travel by bus, and that is happening. and the demand that we are getting for additional routes shows that we are creating a culture where people want to take public transport rather than travel in their own motor vehicles. And the economic impact of that and the climate impact of that by itself means that in this case, the subsidy has a positive economic impact, so it's done deliberately. If we want to get rid of the subsidy, we can do it in 2 days, Moeed, and the bus.
What about the legal problems? I mean, is the legal challenges over or they're still there?
There are some. We had issues with a contractor, and frankly, what I saw coming into the system was Peshawar had not done a project of this scale that actually ran through the entire city. So it was a sort of project.
Probably never since the Mughal days.
Probably never since the Mughal days. And hence, it was the first time that the capacity of the entire public and private sector available in the province was going to be tested on a project of this scale. But a lot of the other accusations thrown at it, the project actually is not more expensive than Punjab, it is cheaper than Punjab. The road built is cheaper than Punjab, but the model is different. So we actually bought our buses and then
unlike
leased
the
them,
Turkish buses in
unlike the Turkish buses in Islamabad. So when people quote the sort of exaggerated cost figures, they quote the figures with the capital investment in the procurement of the buses as well. We have 8 feeder routes that are actually included in the cost that is overall being built. We have 3 or 4 commercial plazas that actually bring revenue that are actually included in the province cost. It's a much bigger project, much more complex project, but it is one where the core service is working better and actually having a very positive impact on the environment in Peshawar.
Now, since you have inspired me so much, I think I'll have to travel to Peshawar to basically ride on the bus.
I will ride with you.
Okay, we'll do it together. Coming back to this environment thing and forcing you to put back your McKinsey hat, what should be done to make the rich industrial North realize that if it is our governance failure, it is also their governance failure for the past quarter century? And countries like Pakistan are suffering, which have not contributed to the biogas effect. What can we do? How do we build our case?
Well, I think there are 2 or 3 things. I think the first thing, and this is where I differ with many environmentalists, is we as countries have to show our intent to solve our problems. Our first step should not be to blame the global North. It actually weakens our case and it almost makes it seem as if we're just out there to beg for money. That's not true. Most of the investments that we've made in the last 10 years, we've made ourselves, we've made proudly ourselves, and I want to showcase those, to show our commitment to large investments that help the environment and that help create a green economy. And I hope that Khyber Pakhtunkhwa can lead the way in that. The second thing that we need to do is to argue our case more effectively at global forums. Typically, and I've seen this also in my consulting life, countries like Pakistan see these large climate conferences as simply opportunities for ministers and staff and senior development officials to travel, to have a good time, to make a few good speeches. You actually have to own the agenda. You actually have to become a climate champion. These negotiations are hard. The international bureaucracy that tends to work in many ways carries more red tape than our own. So you have to effectively be very forceful to get your point across and be willing to negotiate, be willing to make alliances. And the third thing that we need to do, Moeed, that we typically don't do, is to also cut across silos within the country. This is both across departments at the federal level, because climate change is not a Ministry of Climate Change issue. If we're going to tackle climate change, and even if we're going to prepare a case for fighting climate change globally, or to fight our case on climate change against the global North, not only do different federal ministries need to work on this together, the federal government and the administration within the federal government needs to reach out the provinces so the entire country can make its best case. I often feel that that doesn't happen anywhere near the way it should, And as a result, we are seen in the world as, yes, paying lip service, but not being people that actually mean what they say on the impact of climate change. You can see that. The world should be, I just want to make this point, the world should be contributing a lot more to flood relief in Pakistan, because here a disaster has happened.
We interviewed Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He said Pakistan should get at least $15 billion, should actually demand $15 billion for the damages.
Indeed, but we have to have the credibility for people to want to give them to us. And I don't want to make a controversial statement, but what I do want to say is that if you want to make credibility, then you have to work in a certain way so that people can trust you, people can work with you. That's why the flood damage figures that I've given from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa have been very realistic. The sob story that says that I've lost $5 to $10 million is an easy one to tell, but makes me lose credibility. And that's why I believe that most of the established international partners within Pakistan have actually bought Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's story. And in an environment where there's so much polarization in Pakistan, and we believe we're not getting the help from the federal government that we should have, the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank have stepped in to repurpose a lot of aid, a lot of their development assistance rapidly. We're talking 40 to 50 billion rupees. And that is what I believe will take the government through its primary focus of building back fast from floods and of easing the life of this 100,000 affectees.
You were often found on television news complaining that the Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif's government is not releasing certain funds to KP. What is that about?
Again, just the peculiarity of our state. There are two types of funding flows that go from the federal government to the provinces. There are flows such as the division of tax money that is collected that flow automatically. We get that. There are similar flows such as oil and gas revenue that we get automatically. Mechanisms have been built. We get that. What we don't get, and what is very crucial for us, and what Imran Khan's government had solved, but hadn't solved in terms of creating a systemic process, was the royalty that we get for electricity made in hydropower stations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which for a small province like ours,
which is Warsak and Tarbela.
Which is Warsak and Tarbela primarily, is something like 30 billion rupees a year,
right,
which would make a massive impact on our ability to finance flood relief. Similarly, you know that we've taken on the national responsibility for the mainstreaming of the former tribal districts, the ex-FATA region. The budgeting mechanism for that does not exist because a new National Finance Commission, which would redistribute the funds, has not happened. And hence the federal government has to transfer the budgetary resources for FATA. We now take full responsibility for effectively using them. And this is the first year when the budget grants for FATA were actually reduced by about 30 billion rupees, and which means that I somehow need to A, finance the differential in salaries in the tribal districts, B, make up the deficit of the hydro profits money not coming into the province, and C, find a way to fund an extra 120 billion rupees in terms of flood damages. What also doesn't help, and is a bit ironic, is when the Prime Minister comes and says he's going to donate 10 billion rupees to flood affectees through the province, and then we don't get a single rupee of that either. These things are disappointing. They're a part of our political culture. But there's nothing new in Pakistan.
I heard that the Prime Ministers keep on making such kind of statements. There's so much to talk to you, but one last question is, you yourself admitted or said that money is not the only thing which we should look towards the industrial north. What is your expectation of getting help from the multilateral organizations if money is not the only consideration? What else apart from the money? How can they contribute?
You know, what we really need is the capacity that can help design interventions that can help protect against future floods in a better way, whether that is disaster risk financing, whether that is figuring out how to protect populations better from floods, whether that is other such investments such as linking us between climate finance organizations that can help provide money and building the capacity of our organizations to do it. There are many ways in which they can help. But the other thing that they can do is also help with speed.
Speed?
With speed. Speed is important because often when political governments like ours have the appetite for change, we get slowed down by the bureaucracy. That can be our bureaucracy, but what I found is that when we work with partners, sometimes you get the feeling that the pace of processes that are required to be followed to achieve results are so slow that sometimes you can actually achieve the same results yourself. And so if you really want to help governments that want to become role models for other developing countries, I think what international development organizations also need to do is to rethink their models in terms of being able to provide the capacity or the help required at the speed that political leaders like me can help showcase the right change without compromises, but in the right time frames.
Has there been any substantive progress in the last couple of weeks with multilateral organizations?
I think the World Bank in particular has been fantastic. I know the negotiations are led by the Planning and Development Department and our additional Chief Secretary, but I'm constantly in touch. And if the World Bank in particular hadn't helped repackage much of the help that it provided quickly, we would then have had a challenge.
Any contact with European Union?
There have been contact with all partners, and we are the province that attracts the greater quantum of international development assistance. But I think these international development partners also rightly distribute which provinces they're actually going to focus on, who's going to take a lead on what. As I said, I don't have any complaints necessarily in terms of the quantum of who helps us with what. I do wish with many organizations, A, that they can help work with speed, B, that they can also use government systems. Sometimes I find that too many NGOs on the ground, which are born out of sometimes organizational lack of trust in government systems, carry their own inefficiencies. So for example, despite our financial difficulties, we have been the first province to start compensating flood affectees for damaged or destroyed houses. It's I feel incredibly proud that we've been able to do that at a time when the federal government has been starving us of our receivables. But we're able to do it partly because of the flood relief telethons led by the former Prime Minister, partly because our system, in this case our bureaucracy, worked particularly fast. We do it through an ultra-transparent process. All these affectees get their cash handouts in a very similar way to the SARS program through accounts made at the Bank of Khyber, so no human interaction. And I just wish that some of the development community could also have helped us raise funds to put in this, to be able to disburse the 25 to 30 billion rupees that we do so quickly. And the reason that they don't is not our lack of credibility, but is sometimes this national culture that we have where we can exaggerate figures, where we don't have a great track record of either making the right promises or keeping them. And that tends to make it more difficult for the international community to be able to trust what we say. But Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is changing that, and inshallah is definitely going to lead the way in Pakistan in changing that equation permanently.
Thank you so much, Taimur Jhagra. Thank you so much for this interesting discussion.
Thank you.